Hey guys, welcome to Strategic Planning Week 6, or I don't know what week it is. It's the end of the semester. This is kind of the last in the strategic planning session. And today I want to talk about leadership and then kind of finalizing and implementing your strategic plan. So I'm at the iconic Mirror Lake on campus. It's an absolutely beautiful fall day. If you're not on campus and you get up here as a remote student, by all means, come by, check out Mirror Lake. It's a beautiful place to walk, great place to have lunch, to picnic, etc. So hope you get a chance to do that, especially this time of the year. All right, let's jump in. We've gone through this strategic analysis talk in this process, following the chapters in the supplemental text or the additional reading. Now we want to talk about leadership. What does leadership have to do with the strategic plan? Well, if you take my 8420 class, you will know that it's everything. It's absolutely everything. It's so critical. I hope the wind's not too bad. If you get some noise, I apologize. Anyway, we'll see how it goes. So, what do you do? What does the strategic planning committee do in thinking about leadership? One thing is, as you're writing this, as you're putting it together and working with your organization, your nonprofit, your department, whoever it may be, you need to assess that depth and the effectiveness of their leadership. What's currently available? Some organizations are much more sophisticated, much further along. Others have volunteer leaders who may be hesitant. Maybe they're in the leadership position because nobody else would take it, and they felt strongly they wanted it to continue, but they're not really trained. So you've got to look for those things and identify those. So look for opportunities to strengthen that leadership function. How can you help them out? How can you help the organization roll out these new initiatives and demands that this strategic plan is going to create? It's really something to think about. So Kouzes and Posner, have you read them? If not, highly recommended. They're gurus, of course, in leadership. They talk about the 5 practices of the exemplary leader, the guy that, or the gal, the person who models the way. I was picturing Jim, Kouzes, he came and spoke like 4 or 5 years ago here at Ohio State at a leadership seminar. So the person that is the leader, they model the way, they inspire that shared vision, so they've got that inspirational, aspirational piece. And in settings like this, you can see how that can be cool because, you know, this is the Ohio State. So we can aspire to beauty and greatness and the aesthetics and all that. In your organization, it's the same. It's having that inspired vision, challenging the process, asking questions when they need to be asked, enabling others to act, and then encouraging the heart, which is a really interesting one. Take the 8420 class that I teach in the fall, and you'll see we'll talk about this a lot. The philosophy, Peters, think back in the 80s, Drucker's, Peters, they talked a lot about leadership, and that leaders don't create followers, because that sounds implicit, and you've probably read all this stuff. I'm preaching to the choir. Leaders create leaders. It's that culture that everyone embraces responsibility for the organization's success. So Kouzes and Posner talk about the honesty, forward-looking, that visionary piece, the inspirational component, and then the competence. So assessing the leadership, summarizing implications. How can you do that? Gather some perceptions about how effectively the leadership team is. And think about the board, the senior staff. Some of those roles are volunteers in a lot of the organizations that you may be working with. They may or may not understand the need to fulfill all of these responsibilities, the vision, the mission, the assessment of that the strategy is clearly understood. How's the governance of the organization? That's a really specific thing, but it can also be critical. How about the executive director and senior staff? Do they have the training that they need? Your staff development, organizational culture, succession plan. There's so much that's involved in this when you think about finishing up and then rolling out a strategic plan. Leadership is absolutely critical, and you, as the consultant helping them plan it, can really help influence or help them understand the critical role of their leadership. So in Chapter 9, again, in the Allison and Kay text, basic steps, kind of finishing things up and rolling the thing out. So you're drafting up the plan, you do a review process, you document, you get it ready for public distribution, and then reflect and celebrate. So let's jump in and look at those. So drafting, there's a suggested outline. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that. Actually, I'm going to give you my suggested outline as a handout or as a different approach. It's truncated, it's short, and it's what I'm getting requests for all the time. I just did another one this weekend for a small organization, environmental community-based organization around environmental stewardship and homeowners and things, and they didn't have a lot of time. They just wanted some of the basics. So anyway, I'll show that to you. I'll outline that for you. During the college's strategic planning input session, we also did organizing sessions afterward. So it's not just putting it all together, but it's also doing that organization, that second piece. So finalizing the goals and objectives, sitting down with the group and working through to make sure you wordsmith. I just did that this morning, actually, with 2 of our associate deans and a couple of other team members on the strategic planning team. Making sure that you've got the details on the goals and objectives, you've got outcome statements that make sense, you've got specific measurable processes, so just some definitions there on writing objectives. And again, I'll show you, or I'll actually attach some of the things that I've put together on this that I think are a little less formal, but they get the job done. And then conducting that review process. We're going to do that with the college's plan that I just mentioned. We're going to float it out. We're going to send it actually to the provost, who will send it to other deans across campus here. And then we'll also float it back through our people, through our faculty, staff, students, to get their input, to see how did we do with all that input we gathered. Did we get most of it right? Does it make sense that we can move forward with this plan? We'll do that final tweaking, and then it will be ready for public distribution. Dressing it up, get those photos in there, make it visually interesting. Try to make it a little bit compelling, because you don't want people just to say, oh yeah, it's a strategic plan. You want to invite them in to take a look at it and really look through and see what you're talking about, all this work that you've done. Celebrating debriefing. So again, you've taken the time to invest in this. Take the time to celebrate it, to say thanks for the work that you've done. Be sure to thank those key people who have contributed, and maybe it's only a few dozen or maybe it's a few hundred folks that you want to acknowledge and let them know that you didn't just make this plan up. Because I've seen that movie, and you probably have too, when somebody says, here's your strategic plan, here's our strategic plan, but nobody's had any input in it. If you do it right, people will embrace it because they've been asked, they've been heard, their voice has been consulted. And so then you want to acknowledge that and show where you've actually listened. It's written, distributed, celebrated. Now time for the implementation. Ensuring that the plan is synced and translated into your annual program planning. Think about that, the department planning, whatever that may be. Your budgeting, because there may be some items in there that are high budget and high priority. They may be low budget but high priority. So you've got to look at all those. You've got to think about your budget and consider that. And then consider, are there barriers? Are those people who are entrenched that don't want to change and they don't want to do the new thing that everyone identified in the plan? You're going to find that. So what do? You plan to make sure that you don't do that. So preventing or overcoming barriers. We've seen things. Pay attention. Failure to translate the strategies into operational plans. I've seen that where the group stops with the strategy, but they don't have the action plan, the actual operationalize it, so that they can then go do something about it. There's a process called strategic doing. You could Google up really quickly at Purdue. Really interesting stuff. It's a shortcut, but it's an effective way to do some planning depending on what you're working on. Resistance to change, I just mentioned. Lacking specificity. Sometimes we see that, these broad, audacious goals, but they don't have anything specific. You need to make sure you get that so that people can understand what we're going to do. Losing focus, that comes from not bringing it back in and talking about it and reporting on what you're doing. Or failure to adapt to external developments. Things change, so your plan may need to change as well. That's okay. So don't fail to consider the external environment when you're looking at rolling everything out. 4 sub-steps to think through as you're doing this: manage change, implement budgets. We'll look at each one of those. Develop a dashboard and then monitor and evaluate. So how do you help people make changes? Do they need new skills? Do your board members, your staff, to really successfully implement this? Do they need something different that they don't currently have? Can they be trained? Can you put together a seminar, whatever it may be, to help them to understand maybe it's one aspect of the plan or of an action step in the plan that they're not capable of doing because they don't have the training. That's not a bad thing. It just means you need to recognize it and then help them do it. How will the current structures or system need to change to support the new vision? There can be systemic things in your system that needs to update or change, or we're not going to do that anymore. Oh my gosh. Yeah, that's possible. And then how will the organization or mindset or the culture need to change to support some of the new core strategies? All things that you really have to stop and think about. Writing out the annual operational plan. Again, getting your action items into your operations plan or your plan of work, depending on what your organization, what you call it. Action planning worksheets, I'll show you those, or I'll attach those to the notes. And you'll see where it's a great way to take the strategies and actually put names and dates and times and action steps and keep track of them very easily. It's a great mechanism. Create a dashboard. This is one way to help track what you're doing and to track the progress. That could be an online website. It could be a poster in the hallway where you update things and you let folks know who's working on what, or that something's been accomplished that was a plan item, an action item. If you don't track those, though, through some sort of a dashboard, then people will forget about it and you'll really derail, and that plan will sit on the shelf, which is the one thing that you don't want to happen. Why did you invest the time and the process and perhaps the money, well, it is money because your time is money, into doing this if you're going to set it on the shelf and not come back to it in some form? So that dashboard's a great way to do that. And then the dynamic approach to watch for changing trends, the strategic review. How effective has your strategy been in bringing about the big changes? So are things happening? Schedule some meetings with the committee. Maybe that's quarterly, maybe it's twice a year. Or another different approach is to do constant monitoring and reflection of your strategic plan. I advise groups to have it on the agenda every month, not to work on the action items, but just to give a brief report, 60 seconds, on one action item that a certain team is doing. That way that plan is back in front of the group at the monthly board meetings. Again, not being worked on, but being reported on. And that way you're not protracting your meetings to some great extent, but you're simply going over what's been happening. And then the conclusion, just a word to the leader, something to coach the leadership of the organization you're working with, whoever that may be. And Allison and Kay mentioned this in kind of the closing idea. No plan is ever implemented as expected. So you need to kind of say that so people understand. But remember that the ultimate goal is that effective pursuit of the mission, that why, that Simon Sinek, why do we do what we do? So don't feel badly if you need to make changes to accomplish the higher objective. So think about a dynamic, iterative process, an iterative plan, one that actually gets updated. It's not a send, update your strategic plan, and even change something. Oh, we're not going to do that one because the external environment changed. It doesn't make sense anymore. Or we're going to have to do that one differently. It's going to take another 3 months than our original timeline. That's okay. And that also keeps it fresh, and it brings you back to your dashboard of tracking what you're doing. It's good stuff. So that's a wrap. Discussion board, go online and check. Download this PowerPoint. I'm not going to go through this, but there's some detail from the Allison and Kay book on completing the strategic plan, some additional detail on the steps and things that you can take a look at, so feel free to do that. And then there's some discussion on the optional article as a read, supplemental reading. So take a look at that. Watch for my last video, which I'm saying is the most important or the most practical, because I'm going to tell you, like, cutting through all of the formal detail of the work that we've been talking about throughout this series on strategic planning. I'm going to tell you what I actually do in real life with organizations who only have a few hours at each board, or they set aside, two-hour blocks of time. You can still do a lot and help them really move the needle. And I'm going to show you how to do that. So anyway, that's it. Have a great week. Signing off live from Mirror Lake. What a day. Talk to you soon.